This is Judaism Unbound, episode 528, Passover 2026. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Lex Rofberg.
And I'm Rena Yehuda Newman.
And today we are thrilled to get ready for Passover. It's wild, but we're less than a week away. We're actually, as this episode is released, 5 days from the first day of Passover and all of its magic. This year, that is April 1st. So for those of you interested in the combination of April Fool's Day and Passover, we definitely encourage you to start thinking of creative ways to both punk your Seder and bring meaning at the same time. That is a holy combination that we wholly with a W endorse. So that's a quick starting point. We might come back to that. But today we are in the third of a unit of episodes where we're bringing you Rena Yehuda Newman, our new co-host of Judaism Unbound, after so many years with the wonderful Dan Liebenson. For those of you tuning in for the first time in a while, Dan is stepping away from his role as co-host after 10 amazing years. We celebrated him recently at an amazing Zoom gathering, have been hearing amazing testimonials and gratitudes from folks for how he's impacted them. And we have Rena Yehuda Newman, an incredible new co-host. So we're going to dive into Passover today. Briefly before we do, some Judaism Unbouncements. First and foremost, there are some amazing opportunities for learning and unlearning coming up in the Yeshiva. We've got classes, and 3 of them are 3-weekers, just 3-session mini courses that will begin just after Passover. Those are Judaism and Reproductive Justice, Birth Control and Abortion in Jewish History and Ethics with Samira Mehta. Going to be amazing. There's Yiddish Revolutionary Folk Song with musician and educator Chaya, and Torah During Climate Catastrophe, Liberation in Text and Practice with Madeline Canfield. There's also a class that's 6 weeks, sort of a new length for us. Usually we either go with a longer 8-week format or these 3-week mini courses, but we're doing a 6-weeker because I am co-teaching with Lila Corwin Berman, and in a sense, we're each bringing a 3-week mini course to one space, but it's going to be that each class is partially her and partially me. The topic is Jewish citizenship, bound and unbound. You can learn more about it by heading to judaismunbound.com/classes, which is also the place to learn about all the rest of these classes. So don't miss them. Financial aid is available for any and all of these classes, and we really encourage you to check them out. So Unbouncements now concluded. We are going to dive into Passover. What can we make of Passover this year and any year? I'll start because there's something we've been wanting to bring that we haven't the first 2 weeks. I'll start by mentioning the book Passover takes place in the Torah is called Shemot. In English, we call it Exodus, but it means names. And it's actually names plural, which sets a perfect stage for what you wanted to tell our listeners about. And you will find a way to segue that beautifully into questions of liberation, questions of Passover, because as a reminder, this is our liberation episode after creation and revelation the last 2 weeks. So we're bringing you liberation connected to Passover. Rena Yehuda, all you.
One of the things that I wanted to share with listeners straight away is the fact that I have a double-barrel first name. My name is Rena Yehuda. Yehuda is not a last name. It's also a first name. And, usually when I introduce myself, I say, my name is Rena Yehuda. I have 2 first names. And part of the reason that I do that is that in North American cultures, it's less usual for people to have more than one first name. In many Orthodox cultures, it's pretty normal to have more than one first name, but a lot of people don't necessarily recognize that. So I like to announce that that is, in fact, something that is different about my name. Some people think I have a hyphenated last name of Yehuda Newman, but it's just Newman. And this felt relevant to bring up, one, so that all of you lovely listeners, when you are referring to Lex and I, can do so with the fullness of our names. But 2, I think it also says something broader about the Judaism Unbound community, about the direction of this organization, about the direction of the podcast, which is about the fact that we may be known by many names. Many of us have more than one name that we use, whether it's a double-barrel first name like mine, or you have an English name, or a Hebrew name, or a name of another language. One of the ways that we're growing as an organization is that we are becoming more multivocal. From the singular tree trunk of the original flagship Judaism Unbound podcast that you are now listening to has come an entire family of different podcasts that are now under the Judaism Unbound banner. So as we're growing out our Judaism unboundedness into the world, we're becoming more multivocal, and we have many different names that we're known by. And one of the other reasons why it feels like it's worth bringing up is, in a lot of ways, having a non-normative name is a daily struggle for other people who are out there listening, who have long names, who have names that are not easily recognizable in the sort of Anglophone world. There's a sense of there's a struggle. You have to repeat yourself. You have to make sure that that is known about you. People will mispronounce things, or sometimes we abbreviate our names in order to make ourselves more legible in different environments. And that feels relevant to the message of Pesach, the message of Passover, and thinking about what is liberation. And I'm really interested in talking about how Passover is a holiday of multivocality, of many different voices, of many different stories that are all coming out of the same source.
Yeah. One thing we've talked about in the past in Judaism Unbound episodes about Passover, we'll put some in the show notes, is in the Torah, so you can look at it multiple ways, but in the Torah, either there are two separate holidays that later became one, or there's one holiday with two names. For our purposes today, maybe we want to look at it as one holiday with two names because co-host Rena Yehuda has two first names. But I want to remind folks who are longtime listeners and bring into the story for those who are new listeners that throughout the Torah we have, you said the word Pesach, specifically in Torah, that refers to the day where there's a sacrifice, where there's an offering that's eaten by a community. It's not offered up on the altar in the way that many are, but it's eaten together. And that's Pesach. That's the Korban Pesach, the Passover, the Paschal Lamb, the Passover offering. It is sort of the first day that is then followed by what I call in English Matzah-Fest. That is a translation of the phrase Chag Hamatzot. Chag meaning festival, and matzot meaning matzah, or it's the plural of matzah, but the festival of matzahs, the festival of unleavened bread, Matzah-Fest. And we actually, throughout Torah, have both of those, and they don't necessarily seem to be the same. It seems to be that one happens, the Pesach moment, and then you have Matzah-Fest, which we've made meaning out of that in the past. But for us today, I really want to highlight the ways in which matzah, the liberation food, matzah is a food that distills the journey from slavery to freedom. That's why we eat it, to commemorate that journey. It wasn't able to rise because we had to so quickly leave that there wasn't enough time for the matzah to become bread. The only difference between matzah and bread is time. That's like the mathematical equation. Matzah plus time equals bread, because that's what happens when it leavens. We were low on time and had to leave really quickly. And so matzah is the food of that. Liberation is the story. It's not only that God sort of was better and bigger than the Egyptian gods. That is part of the 10 plagues, that God seems to sort of defeat the Egyptian gods. That's not my favorite part of the Passover story. There is a way in which this is a moment where our people collectively, literally like march across a sea together and begin a journey of wandering in the wilderness in freedom, in liberation. But liberation in today's world is something we strive for and aspire towards, but not something we have right now. And so it feels like Passover this year and every year, but this year especially, is something for us to really hold.
I'm really interested in thinking about what does the Passover Seder have for us this year. In the Haggadah, it says every year we are supposed to retell the story as though it has happened to us. And so there's always been this injunction. There's always been this command to be able to engage with the story in a way that feels really real and relevant. And I really think it's important that we turn to Passover as a source of strength for the moment. We're living in bad times, folks. Things are getting more chaotic. And what does that mean for the kinds of spiritual resources that we actually need in order to move moment to moment for a liberated future that is not going to arrive tomorrow, but requires a really, really long fight and a long game? I've been really interested in thinking about what are all of the different things within Jewish tradition, within Jewish practice, at our behest. Things that we've already got in the toolbox. We talked a couple weeks ago about foods that we already have in the fridge. Maybe now it's a tool-based metaphor as we are fixing or as we are building from scratch.
Well, because we had to take a lot of the foods out of the fridge because they're chametz.
They're all chametz. So now we've only got matzah in the fridge. We've got the bread of affliction, and we've got wrenches.
Yes.
Maybe hammers.
Yeah.
We got some nails. I like having segued into our discussion about Passover and liberation after our conversation about names. In Jewish tradition, names are also traditionally a source of strength. We have Avraham and Sarah who go from being Avram and Sarai to Avraham and Sarah once they take on this relationship with God. And most famously, we have the names of Yaakov and Yisrael, Jacob and Israel, who takes on this name after wrestling with an angel and goes from being Yaakov, which literally translates by the heel. So someone who feels like he's being trodden upon because he came out of the womb holding on to his older brother's heel, into Yisrael, meaning one who wrestles with God. Interestingly about Yaakov Yisrael, unlike Avraham and Sarah, who after they get their new names are not referred to by their previous names ever after they've acquired the new hay in both of their names. We have Yaakov and Yisrael, who gets referred to back and forth in different environments. I'm very interested in the different reasonings that commentators have brought about why is Yaakov referred to as Yaakov in some places and Yisrael as Yisrael in some places after the new name has already been implemented. But as I'm thinking about my own two names and my own names as sources of strength in my own life, I'm really thinking about the code switching element of this, right? Who are the people for whom Rena Yehuda is a legible name? Generally speaking, it's Orthodox people and trans people. It's a name that is both feminine and masculine. A little bit about me, my parents gave me both of these names. When I transitioned, I asked for a masculine Hebrew name as well. And my parents gave me the name Yehuda, for whom I'm named for my grandmother, Yehudit. But when I think about the fact that I have this very genderqueer name, what are the things that we're called? What are the stories that we tell about ourselves that fortify us in moments of marginality, in moments of struggle, in moments of things that are the opposite of liberation? We have all of these tools at our behest. And I feel like Passover/Pesach, all of these different names contain different ideas about the kinds of strength that we can draw from in this moment.
Yeah, so let's do some more of them. 4 names that Passover has that are official names. And by the way, we're not limited by the official here. This is a beyond just official Jewish space. That's part of what Unbound means.
Jellicle cats have 3 names, so Passover has 4 names. It's important. The growing of the names. I have 2. The Jellicle cats have 3. Passover has 4, and soon we'll find something with 5.
Yes, we will. And shouts to Passover and to all of its 4s. We spoke a little bit about that recently, but we've got 4 children quoted in the Passover Seder, 4 questions, although they're not 4 questions, it's 4 answers to 1 question. I'll never stop reminding people of that because it bothers me, but we call it 4 questions. There's power to finding the true names of, I'm thinking of Ursula Le Guin, who has this notion of like true names in the Earthsea series. There's this power to names, and Chag HaAviv and Z'man Cheruteinu are the last of the 4 names. Chag HaAviv means festival of spring or Springfest. I grew up in a town, Milwaukee, that had Summerfest. So when I do Matzah-Fest, Springfest, it's calling back to my own roots. But Chag HaAviv is festival of spring, and Z'man Cheruteinu is the time of our liberation, the time of our freedom. And I like thinking about all 4 of those names. In general, when people love to say God has many names, and what can we learn when we look at God with this name, and what can we learn when we look at God with that name? And you just beautifully went to characters in the Torah that have multiple names. And again, Passover happens in a book called Names. We are quote unquote making a name for ourselves. And I mean the we, like the book of Exodus. If I had to come up with a title separate from any established titles, I think it would be something like unifying or coming together or collectivity. It's going from a family, basically, like Jacob and children, to a group containing many smaller families. That's what Exodus is. And then that group together sort of congeals and leaves Egypt. And that group is not only linked by genetic family. It's not just descendants from Jacob. It's also many non-Israelites. We know it's a mixed multitude in the Erev Rav. But we are constantly talking about names Jewishly. And why is it called Pesach? Why Passover? Why is it called Z'man Cheruteinu, time of our freedom? In our prayers, what's the refrain that people say whenever you get to Baruch Atah Adonai? So the community says Baruch Atah Adonai, and then you hear in many communities the mumble. Baruch Hu Uvruch Shmo. It's not usually said that articulately. It's usually Shmo. It's like distilled. But that means blessed is God and blessed is God's name, Shmo. When we want to praise someone, we don't just celebrate them or their body or their thoughts or their ideas. We praise their name. That's kind of strange. Like in English, would it be praising Lex to like praise my name? I don't know. Maybe Shemo, maybe Shem in Hebrew gets at something beyond just name, but maybe it doesn't. And maybe there is a way in which our names distill the whole. And so I'm going to throw it back to you. Give us some more Torah on the names of Passover and maybe how they manifest in the Seder. Chag Hamatzot, especially Matzah-Fest, there's power in that name. What is the power in this holiday related to what we call it? And then as we move forward, we'll get into some of its nitty-gritty with the Seder and beyond.
I want to go back to something that you said about how this moment in the story of the Jewish people is the transition between it going from just a story that's following individuals to a story that's really following a collective. And this feels like a very important piece of Jewish liberation-based wisdom. One of my favorite Hasidic teachings, and this teaching manifests in all sorts of Hasidic philosophy, that it echoes through different Torah portions. We are not just individuals, we are part of a collective whole, but it is so important that we always remember our uniqueness. And this often feels like it's sort of a contradiction. It's like, wait, so focus on the fact that I'm like a robust, unique individual, but also focus on the fact that it doesn't really matter that I'm an individual because ultimately like the collective is the thing that I'm a part of. We're used to, in a really dualistic and binary culture, thinking of these things in contradiction. And Hasidic philosophy really combines these two and says, you cannot have the individual without the collective, and you cannot have the collective without the individual. And the story of Passover is a moment in which the narrative of Torah is finally embodying that. We're not just following one family. You know, in the Western tradition, we have a last name that is the one that is carried on by other people who are a part of our lineage. And then we have a first name, which is the one that is more unique to us. And then we have a middle name that might be unique to us, that might sometimes be from a different family member. It might also be a secret third thing. But this idea that we have names that denote the fact that we are part of something that is bigger than just ourselves. And it's more than just, oh, we're part of something bigger, but actually it is the broader collective that gives our uniqueness its special flavor. These days, I hear the word interdependence getting sprinkled around all the time. And I think it's a really nice innovation that we're talking about interdependence all the time. One of the things that I often hear about interdependence is like it's the opposite of codependence. So instead of kind of stepping on eggshells, trying to regulate for someone else, and then doing everything that you're doing based on that in a way that's about abandoning yourself, instead it's the idea I'm showing up fully as myself as a way of being in relationship to somebody else. This isn't a zero-sum game, but rather we deeply, deeply need each other. And so I'm interested in the ways that names and Passover as a liberation story, finally, we're talking about the collective. And we've got this story of Moses, but we're also talking about Miriam, we're also talking about Aaron, and we're talking about individuals who are a part of a broader liberatory project, which is bringing the Israelites out of Egypt, out of bondage, and into liberation. And we got to talk about the unique individuals, and we got to talk about the group, and we got to do that at the same time.
Yeah, so if the collectiveness, the collectivity of the original story is so key, that we're coming together beyond just our individual selves, then the collectivity of our Seders is important. And that brings us to some practical questions. What do meaningful, unbound Seders look like? Now, there's 1.5 million answers to that. And I think there are some principles. And one of them is that I think every individual in the room plays a pivotal role in what's happening overall. Now, I think that there is usually one or a few people that have sort of mapped out, prepped the Passover Seder. And every Seder that I've been to that has felt moving, every single one, there are no exceptions. I am, in fact, making a prescriptive claim about better and less good Seders. Every single Seder that I've been at that feels deeply moving involves the voices of at least close to everyone, and ideally everyone in the room. And not just in like, oh, well, they all sang Dayenu together. Like, I actually think that the unique Torah of the 6 or 15 or 25 or whatever number of people in the room need to be brought to life. I struggle when there's like these community seders that are like 100 people in a room, whether it's a synagogue seder or any, like, to me, that's not one seder. That's like whoever's at your table is the seder, and then there's like a seder of seders. It's like a coalition of many seders. Because you can't have all 100 of those voices really voiced to the entire space. But so what's that look like? Well, it looks like deformalizing things so people aren't afraid to speak up. It looks like incentivizing question asking. A lot of people at your Seder may not be Jewish. It might be their first Seder ever. I am not excluding them from the set of people whose Torah we need to have. I actually think that their Torah is deeply needed. And I think a lot of Seders, those folks are not given a springboard to participate, but we need to. In my own Seder, I've talked about in the past that my mom, this is not my innovation, this is hers. She either goes to the grocery store or sends me to the grocery store, depending on how slammed we are cooking the day before, to get 50 scratch-off tickets. The little $1 scratch-off tickets. We get a few of the $2 for like bonuses. Everybody who asks a question at any point in the Seder gets a scratch-off ticket. And so people are like climbing over each other to like ask things. Why are we dipping the parsley here? What's the deal with 4 cups of wine? Why not 5? Why not 3? Why aren't we talking about Miriam here? I mean, like, whatever the questions are, my mom thought that it made sense to incentivize that. I mean, look, are people doing it for the victory of a $1 win? Like, I don't think so. I think they're doing it because it's fun to get a little scratch off thing and play with it at the end. But it matters. And it means that people who are newcomers, all of a sudden they realize, oh, the fact that I don't know enough, that's a gift to this Seder because I am supposed to ask the stuff I don't know. For the people who do know in different ways, there are many people with different skills, with different knowledge bases that actually bring a lot to the Seder. It needs to be improvisational enough. It needs to be unplanned enough that people's wisdom can come to the forefront. What I like about this episode is we're releasing it 5 days before. In my experience, most people have not started actually prepping if they're the Seder planner, they mean to prep, a month in advance or multiple weeks in advance. Usually 4 or 5 days before is when it actually starts, maybe 2 or 3 days before.
I'm in the 48-hour zone usually.
Yeah. And so now is the perfect time to plan the Seder. And on that liberation front, it is liberating to be like, oh, I don't have to map. I don't have to have, we're going to use this Haggadah for the 4 questions. We're going to use this supplement to tell the story. We're going to do that. Like, you don't have to figure out all that. You can actually trust your space and leave some of it as a Mad Lib, leave some of it blank, and trust that as a group, you will generate the Torah of the breaking the middle matzah or the washing the hands or the whatever it might be. With my Seder for the last bunch of years, I have refused to use any text for telling the story. We do not look at any text. I ask the room, where do we start the Passover story? And we get 6 different ideas. And eventually we start from what? Does it start when Moses is born? That's usually when most of the stories in the books start. Maybe. Does it start when Joseph goes down to Egypt? Maybe. Does it start with Abraham? We talk about all of those. We pick a starting point. And then I say, what's next? What's next? This is not a room of experts. Every single time we have successfully gotten through the story. And occasionally I have to fill in little things that people forget. But it's okay to miss a little. It's our version of the story. I hope that we can learn to trust the space because it is in fact liberating for ourselves if we're planning the Seder and for our community as attendees, as participants. I don't even like attendees. I can't believe I said that. As part of the kahal, part of the community.
Love the scratch off lottery ticket thing. I might do that at my Seder this year. I'm taking notes. This is great pre-Passover prep for me as somebody who plans my Seder usually 48 hours in advance. I love what you just said about the fact that as the leader of the Seder, you don't actually have to have all the answers. And that feels very countercultural. It's like a great piece of Jewish wisdom that feels like it's really in conversation with what it is to get liberated, especially in a culture where under white supremacy, everything is very hierarchical. And it means that one person has all of the answers and they're standing at the front of the classroom or they are standing at the podium in front of the nation. And instead it's saying, actually trust your space, trust the people who are there. One of the things that my family really likes to do at the beginning of our Passover Seders is that we bring in different photos of grandparents and relatives who are no longer with us. Sometimes we even bring in pictures of people who aren't here with us and they are physically on the planet, but they're from elsewhere. And when we're talking about multivocality in this conversation, it's actually what are the ways that we are expanding our table? What are the ways in which we are bringing more and more people into the group? Because we understand we can't get free unless we have everybody there. To this point of like a good Seder gets everybody talking, I feel like we're really bogged down by a lot of ideas about what a Seder is supposed to look like, or at least I certainly have. And as somebody who grew up Reform and then became Orthodox and is now post-denominational, and I live in these multiple different spaces, I have certainly been plagued by the idea that a Passover Seder is just supposed to look like one thing. I have been plagued. I've been 10 times plagued by the idea that there is only one Seder, and I'm trying to recreate the Platonic ideal of what that Seder is. I remember one of the first Seders that I had with my family, once I had taken on a lot more mitzvot, like a lot more ritual obligations, and I was really stressed about doing it right, because I felt like the Seders that I grew up with weren't quote unquote doing it right. My family was like, you can lead the Seder, but we don't want it to be longer than an hour and a half. Please don't make us sit for longer than that amount of time. And, because of Shalom Bayit, because of like respect for the peace in the household, I tried to do a truncated Seder. I was successful and I felt sad afterwards. I said, hey, I don't feel like I had the Seder that I'm supposed to have, or I feel like I've done it wrong, or I feel limited in this way. And I remember I went over to my neighbor's place. She's a wonderful Jewish educator. Her name's Jane Shapiro. And I remember I told her, I said, I feel like we did like a fake version of the Seder. It wasn't the Seder that I was meant to have. And she turned to me and she said, every year you will always have the Seder that you are meant to have. The Seder that happens is the Seder that is supposed to happen. And I've really leaned into that when I think about a good Seder gets everybody talking. Good Seder is about the things that are revealed right then and there, and actually not about the Platonic ideal of the Seder. A good Seder is about the people who are actually there in the room with you right now. And that's also what liberation is about.
100%. I think we've been plagued collectively with a 3-word articulation. Seder means order. The word Seder in Hebrew, you can translate it as order. What people tend to mean by that is, well, the Seder, the Passover Seder, it refers to a particular procedure. It is very ordered. It is not disordered. That phrase, Seder means order, it's used sometimes as like a scold of, there is a way to do it. Look, there's this song with Kadesh Urchad, all the parts of the Seder, and you do them in that order. And sure, you can mess around with some little things about what those precise parts look like, but you got to stick to the whole thing. You got to cover those boxes. And for traditional Seders, it's not even just that you got to cover those 14 big boxes. You got to cover a whole slew of sub boxes within those sections. I don't buy it. Not only is the Seder that you have the one you were meant to have, it's the sum total of what when it's done in a collaborative way, it's the sum total of everybody's yearnings and passions and stories and flashbacks in the room. You were talking about bringing in photos. That's beautiful. I might steal that from you and bring some of the photos from our house down. We haven't brought photos, but we've often started with Kaddish, with the mourner's Kaddish. The first section of the Seder is called Kadesh, which refers to the first cup of wine. It actually doesn't. Kadesh refers to holiness, but it's marked via the first cup of wine. Because the word Kadesh sounds like Kaddish, and that prayer is a well-known way of commemorating those who are no longer alive, we often say a mourner's Kaddish, which maybe some folks would say is strange, but I don't think it's strange at all. I think for so many people whose Passover Seders are intertexts. Like for many of us, each Passover Seder is a reminder of every previous Passover Seder and a look into future Passover Seders. It's a portal. There's a reason why so many people, they use their grandparents' recipes for things from the Passover Seder. They're holding people from the past, and not even from the past, they're bringing those people into the moment in the same way we are transporting ourselves into the quote-unquote past of the story. I don't even think the story is past tense, by the way. I don't think it happened. I think it is a trans-chronological, it is an across-time story that we and every era can inhabit authentically. And so, of course, we got to bring in our ancestors. And again, and I'll say, like, not just the Jewish ones, for people who didn't grow up Jewish, for people who still aren't Jewish, their ancestors can be part of that story as well. I guarantee that if you ask, like, are there ways this time of year you think about people that you've lost in the past? Folks who are not Jewish will have answers to that question too, and they may have ritual-based answers. They may have some food on the table that reminds them of a loved one. And it adds to the flow, it adds to the meaning when it's not just the bodies in the room, but it's actually many others who are part of it. So I'm really on board with that. And I also want to really remind folks on the doing it right front, quote unquote. Vanessa Oakes was a guest on our show, and she wrote a book about the Passover Haggadah. It's like a biography of the Passover Haggadah. And what you learn reading this book is there is no Passover Haggadah. There's just not one thing that has been the Passover Seder. Even those 14 or 15, depending on how you break it down, sections of the Seder, that notion didn't exist until like 500-ish years ago, roughly. I forget the exact, but people 1,000 years ago, if you'd ask them, what do you do for Kadesh? And then what do you do for Urchatz? They'd be like, what? Because that whole mnemonic device of the different sections was thought of later. There is much less about the Passover Seder that dates back to the beginning than we think, which should allow us to realize, oh, every generation has put their own spin on it, has added stuff, has subtracted stuff, has changed stuff. We do the same.
One of my favorite observations about cultural diffusion and where Jews have been and like what is the Haggadah is the idea about reclining. There's this classic tradition that you recline when you're eating or you recline after you drink wine, and that, you know, some people have specific pillows that they've made for such occasions. My dear brother Gavi made my husband a beautiful pillow. But why do we recline on Passover? Well, we recline because that was what the Romans did. That was how the Romans celebrated their freedom as free citizens, many of whom under the Roman Empire were themselves not free citizens. And so Romans who were wealthy, free subjects would recline on couches that were in what was called a triclinium. And so the Jews of the time decided that for our holiday about freedom, we should do the thing that the wealthy free people do. And so we recreate that tradition, and we've inherited that now. But like, is that quote unquote natively Jewish? Certainly we've been doing it now for 2,000 years. And perhaps there were also versions of the Passover Seder in different places and different times that actually did not inherit this tradition. It's really interesting to think about what made it, what didn't, for whom, where. But I'm curious about the way that this interacts with our questions about multivocality, about what is the true Seder, and actually what is true liberation. It's something that reflects who we are and who's in the room and who's not in the room, who wasn't able to make it into the room. One of the things that I think is cool about the idea of having pictures of other people at the Passover Seder is it's like you said, Lex, you can't have the best discussion if you have a table of 100 people. It's just too many people at once. However, what happens when we build relatively large Passover tables that also are always thinking about the people who aren't able to be there? What does it mean to spiritually build a long table that's also small enough that every person's uniqueness can be seen, that we're not diminished in like the collectivity of a too enormous table in a room that's too big and echoey, but also is large enough that we're thinking about who isn't able to make it into the room? Who are the people we miss? Who are the people who we wish were here that couldn't be? This is a story about getting us all out of Egypt, and all means all of us into liberation.
100%. I think that all of us getting out of Egypt piece is really important. And I want us to enter the laboratory. I want to do a little exchange, and we've started it already with the photos and with the scratch off tickets. But I want people who emerge from this episode to have some practical ideas for how they might play with their Seder. And most of those will come not from you and me. They'll come from us planting a seed and then other people thinking about what fits for their Seder. But I do want to give some examples. And so I want each of us to share one ritual that we've done in the past at our Seders that we think others might enjoy, and one that we're thinking of right now. We're improving. Like I didn't come into this prepping, you didn't come into it, but we're going to trust ourselves in the same way we trust our Seder participants to come up with some creative idea. I'll start with my existing ritual. I'm quoting my mom again. My mom's relationship to Passover and the ways she not only allows the Seder to be fun, but realizes that it must be. It's got to be fun. That's like the primary adjective that I think she's going for. And yes, we also want it to be deep, and it's not that we don't go to, tying this to contemporary important issues that are not just fun. We do that. But the overarching feel needs to be fun. And there's a lot of steps we take with the flow, with the decorations, with all sorts of things. But she, when I was like 4, for the first time, she was like, Lex, I want you to walk around the house and grab as many sort of random weird items that you can find. The stranger, the better. I remember a floppy disk is one of the ones I grabbed. I like to reference that both to date exactly when this was and because it was like that level of just sort of strange item. We put them all in a paper bag, and at the Magid section, at the telling of the story, usually we would tell the story in some way to start, but then we'd have everybody pick an item out of the bag, and after we've told the story, so they have the framework of what the story is, they have to tell us how that frisbee or how that little toy spider or whatever the thing is that's in the bag was part of the Exodus from Egypt. The frisbees, because we didn't have time to have plates as we were leaving, we actually ate our Hillel sandwiches and our matzah with maror and whatever. We ate them off of frisbees as we marched across the sea. I mean, these are the kinds of things people improv, which channels the point of the Seder, I think, which is that we ourselves are in it. So if we're in it, then things in our house, we also can find ways for them to be in it. So that's one ritual that has existed. And now for the hard part, I'm going to try on the fly to think of something new. Many sections of the Seder get less weight. And for me, I'm holding the end a little bit, which is hard, and which often after the festive meal gets condensed. And I'm actually not going to try and change that because I don't think there is a way to effectively do it. But the Afikomen section, the Jewish scavenger hunt, I remind people, we have a ritual scavenger hunt that is part of our Seder. It's like with Easter, people do Easter egg hunts, but it's like, oh, that's like a cool, fun cultural thing that has evolved. The Afikomen search, the hiding matzah and finding it and putting the pieces back together, that's in our traditional, that's religion, quote unquote. That's not just culture. We've had 2 different kinds of Afikomen hunts the past few years. One is my mom has do this word search, and then you find certain letters and you unscramble them, and then it spells out like behind the painting or under the couch, and that's where the Afikomen is. The other is, for the last few years, we've been hiding a big puzzle piece. We Val and I, my wife, we get a big poster board, and we create a beautiful drawing. It's not that beautiful. We create a drawing of something from the Passover Seder, and then we cut puzzle pieces. So everybody at the Seder has one, and we hide them so everybody finds their individual piece, but then we put it together so that it's collective whole. Those are both existing strategies. I'm going to push myself to have a new twist on Afikomen, where in the moment we are finding an Afikomen not just in our house. That this will be a moment to tie our Seder to the rest of the world. That's my push for myself, is there will be an Afikomen hidden somewhere in the world, and there will be a way for us to find it through trivia questions, through an exercise, through like an activity, through something. And that will be a way at the end of our Seder to put us in conversation, not just with ourselves, but with the entire rest of the Jewish and broader world.
Lex, my family did a version of the take random stuff from all around the house and incorporate it into the Seder. The one that I was actually initially going to share was the one that we do that's instead of just putting it all in one bag, we take all of the random bits and pieces, and sometimes it's also like pipe cleaners and pom-poms and other crafting materials, and we put them into like 5 different paper bags. And then we break people up into teams and we give everybody one piece of the story of Passover, piece of the story of the Exodus. And then each team has to tell that chapter and make a diorama based on the different stuff that they get randomly in this bag. I think it's a lot of fun. But since you already took the random stuff from around the house one, I'll give you a different activity that we like to do. This is one that I brought a couple years ago, and it seems to be a winner, so I'll share it here. During the 4 questions, or before or a little bit after we sing it, we play a question asking game. So unlike incentivizing it just with the scratch off cards, I set like a timer for like 5 minutes, and everything that is spoken aloud for those 5 minutes has to be in question format. So it's excellent because then you can have full conversations, but everything ends with the upspeak question. We laugh a lot during that one. You know, the point that you made of that fundamentally the Seder actually has to be fun. This is true of liberation as well. Like if we're not dancing during it, it's not really a great revolution. So I had the advantage because you gave me the improv activity before, so I got to think about it in all of this time that you've been talking about what activities you do at the Seder. The one that comes to mind, my improv Pesach Seder invention, is a take on the 4 children. I really like that section of the Seder, and it's a classic to get to argue about the wicked child and how abusive is that, and is that an okay framework, or do we want to abandon it altogether? That's a great conversation. But I'm interested in thinking about inner child work and bringing inner child work to the 4 children, because the idea is that the 4 children are in each of us. A somatic regulation exercise that I was recently introduced to is the idea that when you're having a tough time, or just as a way of figuring out sort of where you're at any point in the day, you ask yourself, how old am I feeling right now? And then you think about what happened to you at that age that might be informing the experience that you're having now. I think this is a cool exercise. And I wonder what it would be like to go around the table and have everybody say how old they're feeling right now at the Pesach Seder. And people can elaborate if they want to, but do not have to.
That is so cool. I also think we could ask what age are various characters in the story feeling at different moments. How old is Moses at X moment? How old is Miriam at Y moment? That's really cool. I'm excited for the various experiments. We'll tell everybody to be in touch with us at the end. But seriously, send us what you do in your Passover Seder, because every time we share those pieces, there's the potential of the snowball effect where somebody does a cool thing and then the next Seder does it and the next one. May it be so. I want to make sure before we close that we revisit an angle we've often taken on this show. And Dan, to his great credit, has identified over the years that like Passover isn't just Seder. And we might have a problem collectively where like we have all this juicy stuff that we do in our Passover Seders. And most of us go to one Passover Seder, maybe 2. There's the question of should they be on the first 2 nights or should they be spread out? I think they should be spread out, but if you're doing multiple, but etc. And then there's the rest. And it's like, well, I guess we eat matzah. I guess we don't eat certain things. Is that actualizing the goals of Matzah-Fest? I don't think so. In the past, I've proposed doing matzah sculptures, playing with our food, effectively. The inner child piece, like we've talked about that. I think a lot of why we do the Seder that we do is not only to empower children to be some of the teachers. I mean, famously, the 4 questions is recited by the youngest person, etc. It's also for all of us to be children, to act as children. In the same way we are acting as if we were in the story, I think we are acting as if we're children. We're playing with our food the whole time. Oh, we're mixing foods we don't usually. We're dipping them in different ways. All of that is kinesthetic. It's like the kinds of activities you'd set up for a room full of kindergartners. There's a reason why kids tend to like Passover Seders more than they like going to Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur services at a synagogue. But the rest of the holiday, we are impoverished. I don't know if that's a weird word. Like, given that this story is about a journey to freedom, we have a deficit of ritual for the remaining days. If we're going to go back to our framework of Pesach versus Matzah-Fest, the kickoff versus the 7 rest of the days, I think we have less for Chag Hamatzot, for Matzah-Fest. And I still am going to be playing with my food. I like playing with the fruit slices that we get in the Manischewitz packages. I'm going to keep doing that, but I'm going to push myself again to come up with something new. And I think what it's going to be is borrowing from Sukkot. At some point, Dan may have done this, but I haven't. So it is new to me, even if we've referenced it in the past. Don't yell at me in an email and say, Lex, your new idea wasn't new. But Ushpizin, this idea of visitors to the sukkah. There's 7 days of Sukkot, there's 7 days of Passover. There's a bookend effect in our calendar that we don't always notice, where the calendar in the Torah, the only holidays in the Torah are Passover, Shavuot, then the mini holidays of Yom Teruah, which becomes Rosh Hashanah, and Yom Kippur, then Sukkot. That's the fullness of the biblical calendar. And Passover is first, Sukkot is last. Passover starts with a one-day festival, the Pesach, has a 7 days after it. Sukkot starts with 7 days and then ends with a one-day festival, Shemini Atzeret. There is a 1-7-7-1 situation as bookends of our calendar that I believe is very intentional. So borrowing from Sukkot in Passover feels like it makes sense. It's a bookend thing. So I want to have assigned for each days for myself people that I'm welcoming to my meals on Passover. I don't know who they're going to be yet. I think some will be characters from the story. I think they'll be small characters. I don't think Moses, Miriam, that's kind of too easy. We've already featured them in the Seder. I want to ask, who are the folks we didn't really cover in the Seder? The Shifra and Puas, the people who saved Moses' life when they were midwives. The frogs that are part of the plagues. What is it that we distill animals to only being plagues, and not celebrating their positive contributions? We have more of the plague animals than we do other animals throughout the Torah. So maybe welcoming them. I'll have 7. I am committing to this publicly. I will have 7 ushpizin, sets of guests that I'm welcoming. And some might be from later in Jewish tradition or non-Jews. I don't know yet. But I'm going to welcome them to my experience. So that's my rest of the time ritual. Rena Yehuda, what do you got as we close?
I'm thinking about a variation on that, and it feels like my experience as a comics artist is really coming up here. Based on a comic that I had started drawing either last year or 2 years ago, imagining all of Klal Yisrael, imagining all of the Jewish people, and including prophets, sitting at an endless, well, I guess it would technically be finite because there has been a finite number of Jews in the history of the world, although it is a very large number, all sitting at an incredibly, unbelievably long Passover table and discussing different tragedies that have befallen the Jewish people and discussing the tragedy that has befallen the Palestinian people on account of Israel. And I was imagining, what would it look like to have this enormous Seder? And what does it look like to have all Jews, past, present, and future, sitting and talking and arguing and not being on the same page, and having Eliyahu Hanavi sitting in a place of honor, having Elijah the prophet sitting in a place of honor. And I think my version of this question from this comic that I had really only ever drawn in my notebook, I haven't done anything with it, is this question of what does it mean to imagine a Seder that maybe has guests that are not people that we want to honor. I'm thinking about, in your version of the Ushpizin, of the different characters, the different people who, we would like to give respect to because actually they haven't been seen as represented. I'm thinking about, what does it mean to imagine a Seder that happens on the last days of Passover, that is collected with Ushpizin, who are people we are angry with, people who we experience a desire for divine judgment for, people who we feel like have sinned. When, this is not Yom Kippur. This is not the holiday for that. And yet my version of it, which is perhaps a darker version of the thing that you're suggesting, is this question of what would it look like to do creative exercises that actually imagine that Seder table? Maybe that's making a comic about it during Chol HaMoed, during the stretch of time between first days and last days of Passover. Maybe it's doing a writing exercise. Maybe it's just having a conversation with somebody. Maybe it's writing a script. If someone ends up making a screenplay about such a thing, I'd be curious to hear it. But there's a part of me that when I think about also the tensions of liberation and the real difficulty of this philosophy of we're not actually leaving anyone behind, that's not easy work. And I'm curious about what it means to leave some space in Passover when we're thinking about that real question of bringing everybody to freedom. What does it mean to make space for the people who we might not actually want to talk to and the people who are causing the fascism? And what is the role of a Passover Seder, of this kind of ritual in liberation that also is about the value of we're all getting to freedom together? I don't have answers, but I'm curious about the creative exercises that can come out of that. And, look, one of the traditions that I'll share that my family does to accommodate the fact that there's always some part of me that is so angry about the state of the world, and the part of me that is always super, super political and knows that that actually can't be every minute because we also have to be able to do silly, ridiculous games at the Passover Seder. And that often feels incompatible with the desire to talk about the ways that the world is on fire, is that the first night we'll do a Seder that's full of different activities. And the second night, instead of actually doing a full Seder, we'll have a text study or we'll have a guided conversation about some of those heavier topics. That's meant to really be framed in a way that allows us to have sometimes big conversations as a family or as a group that we would never otherwise be able to have during the rest of the year. So I throw that out also to all of you listeners who may be looking around at the state of the world and levity feels impossible. I think the balance of those things is really important. And I think that Passover is a holiday that actually helps us bring those things into balance, because liberation is hard work and it also has to be a good time.
That's such a great place for us to land after this conversation. For what it's worth, I don't think you deny this, I think there are pieces of the classic traditional Seder that do what you're talking about. I mean, dipping our pinkies in the wine and diminishing our joy feels like a concession. It feels like a statement that we're not only thrilled about the way this story goes down. Yeah, we talk about it as like, and I'm saying we. I try not to talk about it as like, in order for us to be free, there was this necessary, basically collateral damage. I think that's what a lot of Haggadahs say. Like, okay, well, we were oppressed and we had to leave, and there was this set of people, the Egyptians, who had to suffer. And like, sorry, but I'm not comfortable saying a bunch of firstborn children who did not themselves do anything to the Israelites are necessary damage for our liberation. I'm not comfortable saying that. And so I'm glad we at the very least diminish our wine. I don't know that it's enough. And I think especially in a moment where it's not abstract, like the connections are not abstract. You mentioned Israel-Palestine. Like there are in fact real human beings that are dying and where their deaths are being framed as somehow necessary for the existence of Jews. And you and I don't believe that's the case. And so finding ways in the Seder and after the Seder to channel that directly, to say that directly, to ritualize it is really important. And then sort of give us the strength to go out in the world and cry out. I mean, this story begins with a crying out. The people effectively yell really loudly. You talked about there are ways in which you feel a deep anger in you sometimes, and you don't want to deny that. Moses, the character, feels a deep anger and like kills a dude at the beginning of this story. The people collectively feel deep pain and anger and literally scream so that God hears them and starts this liberation. So the anger is not separate. The anger is not somehow outside of the experience. So I'm glad you brought us there as we close. There's so many ways for us to bring creativity to Passover. I've said in the past that I think we're ahead of the game compared to other holidays with unbinding Passover. It is more normal for people to be really creative and playful with Passover than other Jewish holidays, and I'm grateful for that. We hope that you'll be in touch with us and send us all the different ways you're playing around with your Seder. And I'm using playing around, again, not just in the trivializing, happy way, but the playing around is also serious in the ways that we closed with. So let us know how that's happening for you and the different rituals you try out. You can be in touch via Facebook or Instagram. Our handles are at Judaism Unbound. You can send us an email at lex@judaismunbound.com or Rena Yehuda at judaismunbound.com, RenaYehuda at judaismunbound.com. You can head to our website, check out show notes for this episode, including links to past Passover episodes with more creative ideas from me, from Dan, from others. And truly, have a Chag Sameach. Have a really happy Passover, whether it's Pesach, the Paschal Lamb sacrificial holiday, whether it's Z'man Cheruteinu, the time of our freedom, whether it's Chag HaAviv, the time of spring, of barley, whether it's Chag Hamatzot, Matzah-Fest. Find ways to combine all those. We hope that it is full of simcha, full of joy for you, and that simcha is not separate from the pain we're all feeling in the world, that simcha can be part of giving us strength to build a better world. I mentioned at the top, we have mini courses in the Young Yeshiva you can take that will be filling our Omer period, our journey from Passover to Shavuot with meaning. We hope that you'll head to JudaismUnbound.com/classes to check those out. Financial aid is available. Truly, have a great Passover. With that, this has been Judaism Unbound.